There are decisions that end conversations at the dinner table, decisions that make your father stop returning your calls, decisions that turn a handshake legacy into a decade of silence. In March 2019, Tyler Brennan walked into a Massey Ferguson dealer in central Iowa and signed paperwork that would fracture a family machine line that had run unbroken since 1979. He ordered a Massey Ferguson 8S405, 405 horsepower, Fendt-built engine, CVT transmission, the kind of tractor that doesn't just replace iron, it replaces identity. His father, Ron Brennan, had bought John Deere since the Carter administration. Every financing meeting, every trade-in, every time the dealer came to the farm with coffee and a handshake, it ended the same way: green paint. The Brennans were a Deere family. Everyone in Madison County knew it. The equipment line at the farm showed it. 4 generations of green iron sitting in a machine shed that looked like a John Deere museum. And Tyler broke it. Not with a conversation, not with an argument, with a signature on a purchase agreement that his father didn't see until the dealer called to confirm the trade-in value on the 8370R. Ron found out from the dealership, not from his son. That's how it started. That's how a tractor became a betrayal. Tyler didn't make the decision lightly. He'd been running the family operation for 3 years by then, managing 2,400 acres of corn and soybeans, with his father still holding majority ownership. Ron was 68. Still sharp, still involved, still the kind of man who walked the fields every morning and knew which pivot needed grease before the mechanic did. But Tyler was the one in the seat now. He was the one pulling 18-hour days during planting season. He was the one watching fuel consumption. He was the one comparing field data from the monitors. And he was the one who started noticing that the John Deere 8370R, a machine Ron had bought new in 2015 for $387,000, wasn't keeping up. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that would justify a service call. It ran fine. It pulled fine. But when Tyler started running the numbers through the Precision Ag software, something became clear. They were losing time. In a 300-acre field, the 8370R was taking 11 minutes longer per pass than it should have. That doesn't sound like much, but across a planting season, across 1,200 acres of corn, that 11 minutes compounded into hours, and hours became days, and days became weather windows they couldn't afford to miss. Tyler brought it up once at dinner, carefully. He mentioned the data, he mentioned the field reports. He said maybe it was time to look at options. Ron's response was immediate. We're a Deere family. That was it. No discussion about horsepower, no conversation about transmission efficiency, just 4 words that ended the topic. But Tyler didn't stop thinking about it. He started watching what other operations were running. He talked to guys at the co-op. He asked questions at the equipment shows. And one name kept coming up in conversations about high-output farming. Massey Ferguson 8S series. Not from salesmen, from farmers. Guys who were running the same soil type, the same acreage, the same tight weather windows, and they were getting done faster. Tyler downloaded spec sheets, he compared power curves, he looked at torque delivery, and the more he dug into the engineering, the more one thing became obvious. The Massey Ferguson 8S wasn't just competitive with the John Deere 8R series. It was better. On paper, the 8S 405 delivered 405 horsepower at the flywheel with a Fendt-built 9.0-liter engine that produced 1,949 pound-feet of torque. The CV transmission, DynaVT, was the same system Fendt had been refining for years in European high-speed road operations. Smooth, efficient, no power interruption during load changes. The John Deere 8370R, 370 horsepower, power shift transmission, proven, reliable. But mechanically, it was a step behind. Tyler knew it, the data showed it, but the data didn't matter, because this wasn't about engineering, it was about legacy. Ron Brennan had bought his first John Deere in 1979, a 4440 that he still kept in the back of the shed, restored, still running. He'd bought every major piece of iron since then from the same dealer, same sales guy for 20 years until the man retired, same service department, same handshake financing. That kind of loyalty meant something in rural Iowa. It meant you were reliable. It meant you were consistent. It meant when times got bad, your dealer would work with you, and times had gotten bad before. In 1985, Ron had nearly lost the farm. Land prices collapsed. Interest rates hit 20%. Half the county went under. But the John Deere dealer restructured his loan, let him skip a payment, kept him in the game. Ron didn't forget that. And he didn't forget that when Tyler's grandfather had a heart attack in 1998, that same dealership sent a mechanic out to the farm on a Sunday to fix a planter so they didn't miss the planting window. Loyalty wasn't a marketing slogan to Ron Brennan. It was survival. So when Tyler brought up switching brands, it wasn't just about a tractor. It was about forgetting where they came from. But Tyler saw it differently. He saw a father who was letting emotion dictate business. He saw an operation that was falling behind because they were too proud to admit the competition had caught up. And he saw a piece of iron that cost nearly $400,000 underperforming in the field while they defended it at the coffee shop. In January 2019, Tyler did something he knew would cause problems. He called the Massey Ferguson dealer. Not to buy, just to look. The dealership was an hour south, just outside Des Moines. Smaller operation. They sold Massey Ferguson, Fendt, and Valtra. The lot didn't have the same polished look as the John Deere dealership back home, but the iron sitting outside was serious. A Fendt 1050, a Massey Ferguson 8S 265, and in the back corner, still wrapped in dealer plastic, a 8S 405. Tyler walked the lot with a sales guy named Rick Holloway, a man in his mid-50s who didn't pitch. He just asked questions. What are you running now? 8370R. What are you unhappy with? Tyler hesitated. That was the moment. He could have said nothing and walked away, but he didn't. Speed. We're losing time in the field. Rick nodded. He didn't trash the John Deere. He didn't oversell the Massey. He just pointed at the 8S 405. That'll fix it. They spent 2 hours going over specs. Rick pulled up field reports from farms in Illinois running similar operations. He showed fuel consumption data. He showed maintenance intervals. And then he said something that stuck with Tyler. Nobody buys a Massey Ferguson because it's their first choice. They buy it because they ran the numbers and realized their first choice was costing them money. Tyler asked if he could demo the machine. Rick said yes. In February, the 8S 405 showed up at the Brennan farm on a lowboy. Ron saw it pull in from the kitchen window. He didn't say a word. He just walked out to the shop and stayed there until the truck left. Tyler spent 3 days running the Massey Ferguson through field prep work, chisel plowing, soil conditioning, load work that would test the transmission and engine under real pressure. The machine didn't just perform, it dominated. The CVT transmission was seamless. No gear hunting, no lag between throttle input and ground speed. The engine delivered torque so smoothly that Tyler could maintain 18 miles per hour in heavy residue without any fluctuation in power. The cab was quieter than the Deere. The ride was smoother. And when he pulled the fuel data at the end of day 2, the Massey Ferguson had burned 11% less diesel than the 8370R over the same field. Tyler ran the ROI calculations that night. Fuel savings, time savings, reduced operator fatigue. Over a 5-year span, the Massey Ferguson would save the operation $47,000 in operating costs and increase field capacity by 14%. He built a full presentation, printed the data, sat down with his father at the kitchen table. Ron looked at the numbers for 30 seconds. Then he pushed the papers back across the table. We're not switching. Tyler tried to explain. He walked through the horsepower curves. He showed the fuel data. He pointed out that the Massey Ferguson 8S was built in Germany by the same people who built Fendt, arguably the most advanced tractor manufacturer in the world. Ron didn't care. We're a Deere family, Tyler. That means something. It means we're losing money. It means we're loyal. Tyler stared at his father. Loyal to who? A brand? Or to this farm? Ron stood up. The conversation was over, but Tyler wasn't done. He owned 40% of the operation. His father owned 60%. But Tyler was the operator. He managed the day-to-day. He made the field decisions. And technically, equipment purchases under $500,000 didn't require joint approval. They just required notice. So in March 2019, Tyler went back to the Massey Ferguson dealer, and he signed. He traded in the 8370R, put $80,000 down, financed the rest at 3.9% over 7 years. The dealer confirmed delivery for late April, right before planting season. Tyler told his father the day the contract was finalized. Ron didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just looked at his son and said, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Then he walked out. They didn't speak for a week. When the Massey Ferguson 8S.405 arrived on a sunny April morning, Ron wasn't there. He'd driven into town. He didn't come back until the truck was gone. The tension in the family became unbearable. Tyler's mother tried to mediate. His younger sister stopped coming to Sunday dinners. The farm felt like a Cold War zone where two men worked the same land but refused to acknowledge each other. But Tyler had made his choice. Now he had to prove it was the right one. Planting season started in late April. The Massey Ferguson 8S.405 hit the field with a 12-row planter in tow, running 18 miles per hour through 300-acre fields of prepared ground. The performance was undeniable. What used to take the John Deere 11 hours to plant, the Massey Ferguson finished in 9. The CVT transmission allowed Tyler to maintain consistent speed without manually adjusting gears. The Fendt-built engine pulled the planter through uneven ground without bogging, and the fuel efficiency was exactly what the demo had promised, 11% better than the 8370R. But the real test wasn't the numbers, it was the neighbors. Central Iowa is a small community. Farmers talk, equipment choices get noticed, and when a 40-year John Deere family suddenly shows up with a Massey Ferguson, people ask questions. At first, the comments were subtle. Trying something new? That's a sharp-looking machine. But underneath the politeness, there was judgment. Because switching brands wasn't just a business decision in a place like Madison County. It was a statement. It said you didn't trust the legacy. It said you thought you were smarter than your father. It said you were willing to risk relationships for a few extra horsepower. And people were watching to see if Tyler Brennan would regret it. The first real test came in mid-May. A late-season storm hit the county, dropping 4 inches of rain in 6 hours. Fields turned into mud. Half the county shut down planting for 3 days, waiting for the ground to dry. But Tyler had a 200-acre field that needed to get in before the window closed. The soil was heavy, wet, the kind of conditions that expose a tractor's weakness. Ron told him to wait. Tyler didn't. He pulled the Massey Ferguson into the field at dawn, 12-row planter hooked up, and started running rows. The machine didn't slip, didn't bog. The CVT adjusted power delivery automatically, keeping ground speed consistent even as the soil grabbed at the tires. The weight distribution, better than the 8370R, kept the front end planted. By noon, Tyler had planted 140 acres. A neighbor stopped by the field edge, leaning out of his truck window. "That Massey holding up?" Tyler nodded. "Better than holding up. It's outworking everything else in the county." The neighbor didn't say anything, just nodded and drove off, but word spread. By the end of May, 3 other farmers in Madison County had called the Massey Ferguson dealer asking about the 8S series. Ron heard about it at the co-op. He didn't say anything to Tyler. But that night, he stood in the doorway of the shop, watching his son grease the Massey Ferguson under the work lights. He still didn't approve. But he couldn't deny what he was seeing. June came. Planting finished ahead of schedule. The Massey Ferguson had covered 1,200 acres in 14 days, 2 days faster than any previous season. Tyler pulled the performance data and ran the calculations. Fuel savings, $8,400. Time savings, 16 hours of operation. Reduced soil compaction from fewer passes. Measurable yield benefit projected at 4 bushels per acre. The ROI was tracking exactly where the projections said it would. But Ron still wasn't talking to him. It wasn't until late July, during a particularly bad stretch of heat, that things finally broke. Tyler was running the Massey Ferguson through a side dress fertilizer application, pulling a 16-row bar through 400 acres of corn. The temperature hit 98 degrees, the kind of day that turns a tractor cab into an oven. Halfway through the field, Tyler saw his father's truck pull up to the edge. Ron got out, stood there, watching. Tyler finished the pass, pulled up to the truck, and shut down the engine. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then Ron spoke. "How's it running?" Tyler looked at his father. "Good, real good." Ron nodded. He walked closer, looked at the Massey Ferguson. ran his hand along the fender. Your grandfather would have hated this. Tyler didn't know what to say. Ron kept talking. He bought Deere because that's what his father bought, and I bought Deere because that's what he bought, and I thought you would too. He looked at Tyler. But maybe that was the problem. Tyler stayed quiet. Ron sighed. I've been watching this machine. I've been watching what it's doing in the field, and I can't argue with it anymore. He paused. You were right. I didn't want you to be, but you were. That was it. No apology, no big reconciliation, just an acknowledgement. But it was enough. The summer of 2019 became a proving ground, not just for the Massey Ferguson, but for Tyler's decision to break from 40 years of brand loyalty. Every field day became a demonstration. Every hour logged became evidence. And every gallon of fuel saved became vindication. But the real pressure came in August. Corn detasseling season hit, and with it came one of the worst droughts central Iowa had seen in a decade. The ground turned hard as concrete, soil moisture dropped to critical levels, and the stress on equipment became extreme. Tyler was running the Massey Ferguson with a cultivator, trying to break up compacted soil between rows to preserve what little moisture was left. The work was brutal. 18-hour days, dust so thick it turned the sky brown, heat that radiated off the ground in waves. The John Deere dealers started seeing machines come in with transmission problems, overheating issues, clutch failures from the constant load cycling in hard soil. Tyler's Massey Ferguson didn't flinch. The CVT transmission, designed for European roadwork where heat management is critical, handled the load without overheating. The Fendt-built cooling system kept engine temps stable even when ambient air hit 104 degrees. And the hydraulic system maintained pressure through 12-hour shifts without fade. Ron noticed. He didn't say anything directly, but Tyler caught him checking the hour meter, reading the maintenance logs, standing in the field watching the Massey Ferguson work. One evening in late August, after a particularly long day, Ron walked into the shop where Tyler was doing an oil change. You do the hydraulic filter yet? Tyler looked up, surprised. It was the first time in months his father had asked a technical question about the Massey Ferguson. Yep, changed it at 500 hours like the manual says. Ron nodded. He picked up the old filter, examined it. Clean. Tyler wiped his hands on a rag. Machine's been solid, no issues. Ron set the filter down. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets. I talked to Jim Hartley yesterday. He said his 8R threw a transmission code last week, third one this summer. Tyler didn't respond. He just waited. He asked me how your Massey was holding up. What'd you tell him? Ron looked at his son. I told him I was wrong. Those 4 words carried more weight than any apology could have, because Ron Brennan wasn't a man who admitted mistakes easily. And he certainly wasn't a man who admitted them to neighbors. But he'd done it. Tyler nodded slowly. Appreciate that. Ron picked up a wrench, handed it to Tyler. Finish up here. I'll check the planter bearings. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was the beginning of one. September brought harvest. The Massey Ferguson switched roles, pulling a grain cart through fields while a contractor ran the combine. The performance remained consistent. Fuel efficiency stayed where the data predicted. Maintenance intervals held, and the machine logged 847 hours by the end of the season without a single breakdown. But the real validation came in October. The local equipment dealer, the same John Deere dealer Ron had been loyal to for 40 years, held their annual farm show. It was a big event. Equipment displays, manufacturer reps, free lunch, and a chance for farmers to compare notes on what worked and what didn't over the season. Tyler almost didn't go. The thought of walking into that dealership with everyone knowing he'd switched brands felt like walking into hostile territory. But Ron insisted, "You're going, and I'm going with you." They drove to the dealership together, parked in the back, and when they walked onto the lot, heads turned. The John Deere sales manager, a guy named Doug Peterson who'd sold Ron his last 5 tractors, came over immediately. "Ron, Tyler, good to see you." Ron shook his hand. Doug looked uncomfortable. "Heard you boys went a different direction this year." Ron didn't flinch. "We did. How'd that work out?" Tyler expected his father to deflect, to change the subject, to avoid the confrontation. Instead, Ron looked Doug straight in the eye. "Best decision we ever made." The statement hung in the air. Other farmers nearby stopped talking. The moment became public. Doug forced a smile. "Well, if you ever want to come back, you know where to find us." Ron shook his head. "Won't be coming back, Doug. That Massey Ferguson outworked, outsaved, and outlasted anything you've sold me in the last 10 years. And my son was smart enough to see it before I was." He put his hand on Tyler's shoulder. "He made the right call, even when I fought him on it." Doug didn't know what to say. He nodded, excused himself, and walked away. Tyler looked at his father. "You didn't have to do that." Ron shrugged. "Yes, I did, because you were right, and I was wrong, and people need to know that." They stayed at the farm show for another hour, and in that time 7 different farmers came up to Tyler asking about the Massey Ferguson 8S405, not out of curiosity, out of genuine interest. Because when a 40-year John Deere family publicly endorses a competitor, people listen. By the end of October, the Massey Ferguson dealer had sold 4 more 8S Series tractors in Madison County. 3 of them went to former John Deere customers. Ron heard about it at the co-op, and this time he smiled. Winter came. The Massey Ferguson sat in the shed, winterized and covered, but the conversations didn't stop. Farmers started asking harder questions, not just about horsepower and fuel efficiency, but about long-term reliability, parts availability, dealer support. Tyler answered honestly. The Massey Ferguson wasn't perfect. Parts took longer to get than John Deere. The dealer network wasn't as extensive. And if something broke in the middle of nowhere, finding a mechanic who knew Fendt-built systems was harder. But those were inconveniences, not deal breakers, because the performance gap was too big to ignore. In January 2020, Ron did something that surprised everyone. He called Rick Holloway at the Massey Ferguson dealer. "Rick, it's Ron Brennan, Tyler's father." Rick remembered him. "Ron, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I want to talk about replacing our utility tractor, the 7930. It's getting old, and I'm thinking maybe it's time to look at one of your 8S models." Rick didn't oversell. He just asked the same question he'd asked Tyler a year earlier. "What are you unhappy with?" Ron smiled. "Nothing yet, but I don't want to be." In March 2021, a Massey Ferguson 8S.265 was delivered to the Brennan farm. Ron signed the paperwork himself. No hesitation, no second thoughts. When the truck pulled away, Ron and Tyler stood in the driveway looking at 2 red tractors sitting side by side in front of the shed. Ron shook his head. "Never thought I'd see the day." Tyler didn't say anything. Ron looked at him. "You know what the hardest part of this was?" "What?" "Admitting that loyalty doesn't mean anything if it's costing you money. I thought staying with Deere was about honor, about respect, about remembering where we came from." He paused. "But you showed me it's not. Loyalty's only worth something if the other side earns it. And Deere stopped earning it years ago. I just didn't want to see it." Tyler nodded. "Took guts to admit that." Ron shrugged. "Took guts to break a 40-year line. You did that. I just had to catch up." They stood there for a moment, 2 men looking at 2 machines that represented a family decision that had fractured and then healed over the course of 2 years. Ron turned to Tyler. "Your grandfather's 4440 is still in the back of the shed. Still runs. I'm keeping it. Good. But it's a museum piece now, not a workhorse." Tyler understood. "Legacy's worth remembering, just not worth dying for." Ron nodded. "That's about right." The Brennan farm runs Massey Ferguson now. 2 8S Series tractors, a 7S for utility work, and every piece of iron performs exactly like the data said it would. Fuel efficiency, time savings, reliability. But the real win wasn't the machines, it was the lesson. Because Tyler Brennan learned that sometimes the hardest decision is the right one. That breaking tradition isn't betrayal, it's evolution. And that honoring your father doesn't mean following him blindly. It means being willing to lead when he can't see the path. Ron Brennan learned something too. He learned that legacy isn't about the color of the paint. It's about whether the farm survives long enough to pass down. And sometimes, survival means letting go of the past, even when the past is 40 years of green iron sitting in a shed. Today, if you drive past the Brennan farm, you'll see red tractors in the field. You'll see a family working together. And you'll see an operation that's more efficient, more profitable, and more forward-thinking than it's been in decades. And in the back of the shed, under a tarp, sits a restored John Deere 4440. a reminder of where they came from, but not where they're going, because bloodlines don't pull plows. Horsepower does. And sometimes the only way to honor the past is to be brave enough to break from it.